Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Coda Radio. It is, as always, Mike. I apologize for the landscaping sounds in the background, but they're not in the main show, just the intro here. Today, we've got Nick Proud of Nextbotics again from over in the UK. Great conversation about .NET 10, the recently released or soon to release .NET, and a little bit of C# 14, as well as, well, where no man has gone before, Star Trek, which I mean where I often go because I love it. A couple pieces of housekeeping really quick this week. We have tons of jobs posted in the hiring channel. Thanks to Crashmaster, he's been really on this. So yeah, you got all kinds of stuff in there. We got stuff from Fly.io, a company called ShorePoint. There's a System 76 thing in there if you scroll up. Frameworks in there. So check that out. Check out the Discord. And always check out Alice.dev for your automation ETL needs. Talk to you soon. Bye, Z's. This episode is sponsored by Mailtrap, an email platform that developers love. Go for high inboxing rates. Try today at mailtrap.io. Check the details in the description below. Well, hello, Nick Proud, CTO at Nextbotics, which I gotta say has a very, very cool name. And we've been on the show before, of course, but also a Microsoft MVP and author. Also quite the prolific YouTube educator. Nick, is there something you don't do? Did I miss anything?
Stay consistent, I think, is actually something I don't do. Like the YouTube stuff recently, unfortunately, has been a little bit quieter, but there is a good reason for it. I'm going straight into plugs, aren't I? Like an absolute shameless person.
I love it.
But I've been doing a lot of course creation on the DomeTrain platform. So if you're not familiar with .NET content creators, there's a pretty prolific creator called Nick Chapsis, so another Nick, more famous Nick, and he set up a site called DomeTrain, which is a kind of way of creating the pair programming experience for .NET development and for developers who want to learn C#. So I've been doing a lot of work on that, which is kind of obviously, besides doing the day job, it's kind of taking a bit of a hit on the YouTube side, but I'm planning on getting back into it, especially seeing as we're going to get a nice new shiny .NET soon.
So is this, I'm definitely going to be dating myself here. I don't know if you remember TechPub from Rob Connery, also a .NET guy who I'm proud to say converted briefly to the Rails side of the force and then went back to work for Microsoft. I don't know what you guys' deal is. You can't let anybody join us for more than 2 weeks. But
we don't bear grudge.
He had TechPub, a site I'm looking at that's very similar that sold out to Pluralsight, but it's like educational videos. You know, okay.
Yeah, it's that sort of thing. I mean, the Pluralsight is the obvious alternative, but what we try to do is we create a bit more of an informal atmosphere. It's a lot more. We try to make it less sort of corporate, if possible. You know, just to try and replicate that experience of sitting next to somebody and learning something fresh, because that's something that's definitely lacking recently, especially since everybody decided to work from home.
Yep.
Well, they didn't decide to. They pretty much didn't have a choice. But obviously now that is the norm, we definitely miss out on that.
Awesome. And what kind of videos are you doing up here?
So I've just, recently released a video on, a course on Dapper. So Dapper is a micro ORM that you can use in .NET.
Oh, okay. And
really good way of getting some of the functionality that you'd see in things like Entity Framework, but you still have a lot of control over the SQL that you write. So I did a Zero to Hero course on Dapper, and I'm currently working on a SignalR course. So doing a lot. I'm sort of living in the world of real-time networking at the moment.
Right, and for those of us on the open source side of life, that's like a SQL Alchemy in Python or a Active Record in Ruby.
Yeah. So you can do like a mapping to a strongly typed object from a record in your database.
Right. Object relational mappers. They don't just exist in Rails. See.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned a new .NET. What's going on here? They're progressing across the galaxy in a Borg-like fashion.
Yep, resistance is futile. We'll get that in as early as possible. So yeah, the next .NET version is on its way, but in true Microsoft fashion, there's an extensive preview program, so you can pretty much get the latest build that we'll see in release now. And I think it is going to be a long-term release, a long-term support build anyway, so it should be supported for a couple of years, or I think 18 months is the standard. But what we're seeing with this is a pretty incremental release. We're seeing some nice quality of life features. I feel like it's a bit of a gear up towards more of an AI push. I don't think that's a shocking take, really. But ultimately, one of the things I've noticed recently in my travels is working with a lot of customers that want to get into AI. They're not thinking about the fact that you've got to prep your data for AI, and
Sure
performance
do.
is key, especially performance. So what we're seeing in .NET 10 is things like performance improvements with the span type, which is won't go into loads of detail on that because it's pretty C# specific, but it's ultimately just an arbitrary block of memory that you can manipulate. And there's things like implicit conversions between the different kinds of spans. So I think they're trying to encourage people to use these more performative aspects of .NET. And in my opinion, that's probably a bit of a push towards AI.
So is this, I guess for those of us who aren't living and breathing .NET every day, is this something that, I'm running, I don't know, let's say my ASP MVC apps, right?
Yeah.
Or my, do they still call them Maui? I know the front end frameworks change, like I changed my underwear.
Yeah, I mean, Maui's still the sort of main UI, cross-platform web framework that they want you to use. And there have been quite extensive changes to it, but it's still, for me, you're not going to get the same experience that you get if you pick up something like React or Angular, because it's still trying very hard to be as generic as possible. And I think that's been the mission of .NET for a long time. I think .NET has an adoption problem. I think a lot of people still hark back to the old framework days and they think of Windows. But for the past sort of 5-6 years at least, I've definitely seen a shift where they've tried to make this the ultimate sort of general purpose language. And one of the things in .NET 10 that I'm most excited about, I think, is this idea of a script-like execution. So yeah, I don't know how long it's been since you've written C# or done a .NET project, but there's quite a bit of ceremony, isn't there, to setting up a project? Like, if you're setting up an MVC project, you've got or any project, to be honest, you've got this CS proj file, you've got a solution, you've got about a million different folders. And one of the things that .NET 10 is boasting is this ability to do something a little bit more like Python, for example, where you can have a single file and you're just doing things like console write line or import package, create a minimal API, and you can just execute that from the CLI. You don't have to set up a whole project. You can just say, I need a little bit of functionality for whatever use case. I'm just going to write a quick script. Or if you want to pass somebody an API, you can just say, here you go, just type .NET run and then the name of the project, the CS file, in the CLI, and away you go. So that's quite a new thing for .NET because it's often been seen as something quite heavy. You've got quite a heavy project, you've got to set it all up and then you can start. Whereas now, we're seeing a more Python-like approach.
So more scalability, and not in terms of like Twitter scale, but scalability in terms of, I think your Python example is great, right? I can have my demo grade your crappy database script, which is a thing I'm launching soon, to just test it out and see if it actually works on my local. And then when I want to scale that up to an actual fast API application, I can go ahead and add the ceremony, add the database, add all the networking stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really simple to do so. In some of the recent demos I've seen, one of the crucial things to have is package management, being able to add dependencies through NuGet still. That's still just a one-liner. You can just say, there's a new syntax. I think it's like # and then package, and then you name your package and it will just download it from NuGet. So even though you're only running this very lightweight, single file, you can still bring in libraries. You can still say, you could even plug Entity Framework into it and have an ORM experience with a database. That's massive for, like you say, throwaway projects. And I think this is an attempt to solve that adoption problem where people think that it's too full on to try and get going with C#. Or, I saw a really interesting take from, again, Nick Chapsis, the guy at Dome Train. He said that there are two kinds of C# developers for the most part. There's people who've picked up C# because they want to make games in Unity.
Of course.
or they joined a company and that's just what they wrote. And so you end up kind of falling into C Sharp. Whereas I think with .NET 10 and C Sharp 14, there's definitely, like I said, a push for AI, a prep for applications that are moving into a more AI focus, but also to try and solve this adoption problem that .NET's had for a long time.
It's interesting you mentioned Unity because my son takes a game programming course. It's like an extra thing called CodeWiz, and what they're doing now is Unity. Right, as you work up the levels, they end up teaching you that C Sharp is very different from the type of enterprise C Sharp that I'm used to.
Yeah,
it's honestly, it feels like a scripting language.
Yeah, it really is. I've done a little bit of Unity, and that's the first thing that struck me as an existing C Sharp dev going into Unity was like, wow, okay, I don't feel like I'm creating a project in the same way. It feels very, again, throwaway. It feels like, a script for each element of the game, and that completely warps your sense of architecture. It's quite jarring going from corporate, C Sharp development into Unity in particular.
So it's interesting. Okay, so we got the scalability. Now, what else is coming out in the new .NET that might be of interest, let's say, to folks who aren't necessarily in that Microsoft enterprise space?
Yeah, so there are some of the nice developer quality of life features. So things things that we do in most languages, like checking for nulls. Like if, for example, in C Sharp, if you're looking to do, if this field is null, assign something to it.
Right.
Then there's a new feature for that, which is just a bit of syntactic sugar, which allows you to get rid of the if statement ultimately. So you can just say, here's a value, it could be null, so then set it to this if it is null. So, that's that kind of classic, removing lines of code. That's still quite fashionable in C Sharp, trying to reduce the number of lines of code. And it's not to everyone's taste, and I can't speak for a lot of other languages, but I do see that is still quite a fashionable thing. The one that I think is a really nice quality of life change for developers in particular is this concept of field-backed properties. So, you'd probably be able to fill me in on the Ruby side because I'm not a Ruby developer at all. But in C Sharp, there's a concept of a backing property where you can have a publicly facing property, and accessing that will actually go and fetch a value from a private field. Have you got a similar concept in Ruby, or is it largely a Java and C Sharp thing?
Less so, right? There's things you could do with, this is pretty Railsy, but like attribute accessor, where I almost think perhaps the closer analogy to that would be in Python that I use.
Yep. Yeah.
Hybrid properties where it acts as though it was a property, but it's usually computed. You can do that in Ruby too. I think they just call them computed properties. So this is where my knowledge of Java is far better than my C Sharp, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, in Java, you can have dog.breed, and breed is really going in and accessing some like private genetic information and computing a string.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's pretty much it. Yeah. So where you've got
that would be like a hybrid property. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so like a private field that obviously you can only access inside that class, because we're talking object oriented, aren't we?
Okay.
And then you've got a need to expose that in a certain way, and then you've got a public property which goes and fetches that. And so the field backed properties allows you to remove a lot of that boilerplate. So you don't have to have the private field exist at all. You can just specify with a new keyword field what the backing field should be. So it's along the same vein as what I was talking about with the null checks or the null assignments. It was trying to reduce the amount of lines of code, and it's a really interesting debate that I'm seeing at the moment. Is that the way we should be progressing? Should we be sort of adding shorthand and things like that?
Okay, yeah. So that's totally doable in Ruby, right? You could have a public field or a public method that access a private property on a model or whatever, right? It could be anything.
Yeah.
So now is this? So this, again, see, this is fun talking to people. What I don't actually know what they're talking about. Is this allowing some sort of link voodoo or?
I don't think it's. Are you talking about like LinQ?
LinQ, yep.
I don't think it won't be related to that because this is more just about the members of a class. So it's less about interacting with the database. Although I guess you could use it in the context of that. I think it's the theme I'm seeing when I'm looking through the latest preview is this removal of boilerplate, and I think they've just got too much ceremony.
Okay. Okay. So it is getting back to that almost concept of getting rid of some of because C sharp is pretty old, right? I mean, if we have to, maybe it is worth a quick history lesson, right? C sharp. I mean, are we going to talk about J sharp? Or we don't talk about Bruno?
Well, J sharp it's probably a bit before my time, although technically C sharp is still, it was going since before I was grown up, to be honest. But I mean, in terms of the history lesson, what might be useful is the difference between the .NET framework and .NET Core, or confusingly, they've now just called it .NET. We've had this gritty reboot.
Core's gone, right? Core, or is it actually gone, or do they just rename it?
Well, it's kind of gone and it's kind of not. Like, if you're talking about .NET, we tend to just refer to it as just .NET. So back when .NET 5 came out, this was when they made the massive divergence from .NET Framework, which I think finished at like 4.8, I think. And that was very much like a classic Windows framework. You had some cross functionality with assistance from the open source community, but ultimately it was the very sort of old school Microsoft way of doing things. They got to .NET 5 and they introduced this concept of .NET Core. So they started allowing cross-platform. They open sourced a lot of the language. Most of it now is open source. It's been a dramatic shift. And then now as we're approaching .NET 10, it's kind of been rebranded as just .NET. None of this core, or they had .NET Standard for a while. That was extremely confusing. But the confusing thing is they still have Entity Framework Core, ASP.NET Core, and so really, I don't think you can go wrong if you say core. We all know what you mean if you say core, to be honest.
That is very confusing.
It is really confusing. Yeah. The language around .NET and the different versions is historically confusing. But I think if you're coming into it as a junior developer, which is what obviously we want because we have that adoption problem,
right?
It's a lot simpler. It's just okay. We're going into the 10th version. So I think they've made the right decision to simplify it. And obviously, if you are coming into it fresh, you've only ever known this wonderful world of open source, C#, open source, PowerShell even. Everything's gone down that sort of open source route.
Well, right. I mean, just because my audience here, right? Like C# on Linux is really good now. .NET on Linux is really good. You just use the command line tools with the VS Code plugin if you want, and you kind of don't have to worry about a lot. And you might disagree with this, but I feel like you can just ignore a ton of the, let's call it Visual Studio Classic ceremony.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially now with .NET 10, where we're talking about just creating this one .cs file, and then if you've got the .NET SDK running on Linux, you have a CLI where you can say .NET run your project or your CS file, and away you go. So, where at the moment, if you're writing small scripts or small automations in Linux, you'll probably veer towards something like Python, or at least I would in the past. Whereas now it's absolutely viable to say, yeah, I'm going to write a C# project. The tricky thing is how you convince people to do that, because it's been so culturally ingrained, especially in the Linux community, that Microsoft bad, and I'm not here to say Microsoft is now the angel in the room, but we're in a world now where what was originally thought impossible is possible. Having that. I guess you could say Java-like experience if you're a Java refugee and you want to do something more modern. The other thing about open source as well, or at least Linux and C#, is that one of the new features allows the language to be a lot more extendable. So again, I'll try and draw some parallels with Ruby as a complete novice in that area, but we have the concept of extension methods in C#. So you can take a type and you can say, okay, I have a string, for example, and I very often encode that as base 64. Now, that's not a built-in method in .NET. I still don't know why, but it isn't. So you can create it so that you'd be able to say, my string dot encode as base 64. Again, anything, I'm just curious, actually, is there anything like that in Ruby or?
Yeah, you can add it. You just want to add a method to an existing class, basically, right?
Yeah, ultimately. Yeah.
So weirdly, I went right to Objective C, my
Oh,
my
okay.
old home, my Rivendell, and I'm like, yeah, that's an extension. Just do it. You're fine. Again, so Ruby is weird, right? Especially Rails, which I think when people say Ruby, they pretty much mean Rails.
Yeah.
You can even take this way, way too far and do something called monkey patching, which is where you take the existing methods of, I mean, I could spend an hour giving you horror stories that I've seen, but let's not, right?
Is monkey patching the official term?
Actually, yes.
That's
I mean,
escalating.
I don't know. Maybe they changed it because whatever, but that is what I was taught it was called. And that is what I still hear about it called, the Ruby folks that I talk to, which I do quite frequently on the Rails LinkedIn group.
Yeah.
And it's a nightmare. So you'll take like a common method, which let's just say it's, I don't know, my model. Let's use dog, and you want to monkey patch the update method for that model, right? Which is already inheriting from active record model. The other developers may not necessarily know that you've done this.
Mm-hmm.
So what you've done is changed what a built-in method does with very little hint that you've done it.
Well, that's interesting because that's a little bit more invasive than I was expecting.
Well, you could do just regular extensions, right? I think Ruby has a different name for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you can do like a common thing people used to do before strings were frozen by default was like add a extension to create a new string that was like freeze it by default. And freezing just makes it non-mutable. I wonder if you have this problem, right? Over time, you tend to work with different languages and frameworks. And because like Java, but then really when I got serious, it was Objective-C for me. I tend to use the Objective-C words for things, which, right, mutable, immutable, extensions. If you want to get me started on small talk style message sending, we could be here for days. I don't remember what Ruby calls it. Quickly look that up. I have somebody in the chat or, somebody, we're not live right now, but somebody listening can. But yeah, it has the concept. It's just, I guess my point is it's a little more dangerous than what you're describing because I'm assuming I can't like overwrite in C#, I don't know, string.split if there is such a method.
It's a good question, actually. I've not tried to do it myself.
Well, it's a bad idea. I mean, I think it shouldn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not typically the use case that you would talk about when you're referring to extension methods in C#. You would literally be saying, oh, it would be really great if I had a quick way of doing X on a type, but without changing the class. I think that's the whole idea of it is to have a sort of segregation of functionality. So if it's not a built-in type like string, for example, let's say dog, and you do just want to chain on something that is not going to affect the underlying class, then yeah, extension methods are the way to do that. But historically in C#, the way up until this point, the way you do it is you have to create a static class for each. You create a static class, and then you would have this really strange keyword, this parameter, which mirrors the type you're changing. Whereas in .NET 10, they're creating these new extension blocks. So you can create a block with the extension keyword, it's a new keyword, and then you pass in your extension source. So if that's, say, for example, again, a string, then you can pass that in as one parameter. And then you can have a bunch of methods inside that block. So you've got a little bit more control over how you organize your extension methods. And you can also add properties and indexes to existing types. So previously it was mostly methods, but you can now extend it with properties and indexes. So it does allow you to describe the state of something through an extension as well.
Interesting.
I mean, these are things that are probably more, like I say, there's quite big features like the single page, single script execution. I think that's a fundamental change to the way we execute our projects. But it's also quite well balanced because you've got a lot of these little sort of quality of life changes that are coming in .NET 10.
Huh. So what would you say is the thing you're most excited for?
Oh, I think it's the single page stuff because it just seems to be such a compelling use case to be able to quickly build something simple. There's been a real emphasis on simplicity with .NET. If you've seen anything around the minimal APIs, for example, back in the day, you'd have, especially for MVC, you'd have things like controllers, which can be fully fledged classes, to represent different API endpoints. Whereas now you can have a minimal API, so you can just have essentially an anonymous function which serves as an API endpoint. And so I feel like Microsoft or the .NET team have followed that up with a similar paradigm with the single page execution. If you just need a very simple API, you very often in my work, especially, I sometimes just need to have something exposed, but with maybe one or two endpoints. And so being able to just have one script and a minimal API inside it that I can create inside of 15 minutes in terms of productivity is massive. That is really, really compelling. The emphasis is no longer on these massive projects. It's more on, what are the other players doing? Python, again, as an example, it's really easy to just create an automation or a script in Python. It's the reason they teach it in universities, or they get people to start with Python, because it is so simple. And so, it seems obvious, but I just feel like it's a new layer of abstraction, which I'm all for, to be honest. I'm not
right.
I'm not desperate to get stuck into the guts of things when I'm building in prod.
You don't want to sit there and just like fight with the tooling?
I've been through many tool wars. I've peered into the compiler, and it's I'll never forget what I saw. But
yes,
but
it's
those
a North
days are
Pole
gone.
situation. Yes, it's so okay. Wrapping up here, what would you say to someone skeptical about .NET? Right? Maybe they've been a lifelong Pythonista, or they're we got to give them their plug. They're a Rustacean, a crab person. What would you say is the one thing they should look at that might, let's say, challenge some of their existing bias?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say you've always got to try what the competitors are doing. You've always got to see the other side, because you never know what you might be missing. And I'd understand the hesitation if it was a high barrier to entry, but that's the whole point of this new release, is lowering that barrier of entry to solve that adoption problem. So I would say to those people that it's so easy to get started now. Why wouldn't you just take an hour to try it? I'd say the cross-platform element is really compelling as well. For a lot of startups now that just need to get an application out there, and they need to have everything wired up. Say you're building a new cloud stack, things like Aspire, the fairly new cloud orchestrator for .NET. It's definitely worth your time, because ultimately you're going to be spending a lot of time wiring up databases to APIs, to blob storage, or whatever other components of your stack you're building in a startup. So I think there's the opportunity there to accelerate what you're doing, in the same way that you're probably using ChatGPT to accelerate your coding. Why not explore something that is as close to plug and play as possible?
I love it. All right, last question, and I'm going to change the rules here because you've been on before. Instead of your favorite tool, forget that. What is your favorite Star Trek?
Oh, what a beautiful question.
I thought it was perfect myself.
Well, I mean, it's got to be The Next Generation.
Okay. Yep. The classic answer.
I'm a huge Patrick Stewart fan. And to the point where my 5-year-old daughter actually calls him Grandad Picard.
Granddad Picard.
I think she's actually she kind of sees him as a grandfather figure, which is so cool. I don't know. I think I just love I love the principles that he has. He's extremely hard to corrupt. And he's such an interesting character, and it's all about Picard, really. I mean, I love the rest of the crew. My wife calls Crusher Bev, which is great. And we love that bromance with Data and Geordi. So, yeah, it's all about The Next Generation for me. I mean, I love DS9 because I love the political angle. And Voyager was obviously, there's a huge amount of Borg stuff in Voyager, and I'm a huge fan of the Borg. But it's got to be the next gen for me. How about you?
Oh, I mean, the next gen is a pretty good answer. I think for me, it's DS9. I like the idea of to me, it's just different, right? They're on a station. It's tough because now I'm flip flopping, but I think it is DS9 for me. I do like the political stuff. I like it has a very 90s like post Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Although that's came right back. I mean, geez, that really, yeah.
But the crossover stuff, though, I mean, that's one of the first
Yep.
versions of Star Trek to really do the crossover stuff, especially in the first episode with Locutus and all that stuff.
Locutus, yep.
Incredible.
Yeah, I like the idea of them having to kind of just figure it out, right? Like the Federation's there, but they're pretty far out for the good portion of it. I guess you could say the same thing for Voyager too. Honestly, I've been watching Strange New Worlds, and I kind of like that a lot. I just
you know what? I'm actually enjoying Strange New Worlds quite a bit.
But I only finished the first season, so I'm hesitant to.
Oh, it gets better. Yeah, it gets better. It feels more like the classic sort of different story every week. Yeah. I'm not going to say it's as good as Next Gen, obviously, but they've got an idea of what the fans want, I think, in this one.
Yeah, I definitely. How could I say it? I definitely feel like Strange New World. Yeah, I want to be careful with this, but
yeah, be careful with Trek. It's a sensitive subject.
It is almost correcting although in hindsight, Discovery is not that bad, right? My issue with Discovery is I really, really liked Captain Lorca, but as Captain Lorca, not the weird twist.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I want to see a Star Trek where the guy's like, no, man, we just got to win this war. And we're not going to worry about debating. That's my one issue with Picard. And I know you can't criticize Picard, but having a Socratic debate about morals and ethics and virtue when some colony of just civilians is being bombed.
Mm-hmm.
This might be my inner American in me. Let's get the jets and hit them back. But I'm like, Lorca's like, no, we just got to bomb the crap out of the Klingons until they stop. And we don't need to care why they're acting the way they're acting. Which I listened to a lot of The Rest is History with the two British historians, and they would say that it would be, I can already hear Dominic Sambrook in my head being like, it's a very American way to think about that. But it is how I think, and I don't know. But then they ruined Lorca on me. By the way, Lorca, I think a Scottish actor, right? Jason Isaacs.
Yeah, brilliant.
So it all ends up at the UK kind of somehow.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's British, so therefore he's going to end up being a villain at some point.
That's the problem. I realized that when I was 10. I was a little kid, and I'm like, hang on. He said lieutenant instead of lieutenant. God damn it, they're the bad guys.
Yeah, that's what we are over here. We're just a bunch of scheming villains ready to find our moment.
I know, we only get a break during tea time. It's the only time you guys let up. Is what
exactly. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Afternoon tea. That's your moment. That's your
my moment. 4:00. That's it. That's all we got.
When the crumpets come out, the shields are down.
That's right. So George Washington was just like, all right, it's almost 4. Although he was basically British too, right? It's crazy. So I don't know. No offense to the United Kingdom.
That's good. I mean, don't worry. I think we were definitely pretty villainous, if I'm honest.
Yeah, well, we certainly did our part to try to one up you. Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with DS9. Now I'm hemming and hawing about Strange New Worlds, but I haven't. I don't think I can pick one until it's finished.
Yeah, I get that. I think DS9, because it's complete and it's got such a nice. Well, I was going to say it's got such a nice ending. There's a lot of holes in the end of that.
Well, the ending's super weird.
It is very odd, and the whole Bajoran religious thing at the end I find really hard to watch. It drags on for a long time, but I just want to see more battles in space, really.
Yeah, more battles in space. I mean, I like the political thing of the Cardassians and the Bajorans have been at war for basically ever. But the problem is just like what happens in real life, right? When you're constantly at war, the same people, the lines between who's kind of who start to change, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to spoil. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm getting at. There's a big obvious reveal that kind of screws with one of the characters. It's like, they're not all monsters, and sometimes we can be bastards too, right?
Yeah.
And who doesn't like Quark's bar?
Oh, I mean, is it still? Can you still go there?
I don't think so, but I do have a pint glass from there actually.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, I hand wash that only because it's one of those kind of steamed on decals.
Yeah.
It's really just the idea of the Ferengi endlessly and somewhat haplessly trying to make money off this war. I thought it was pretty funny.
That was one thing about the Ferengi as well, is they were so different when they were introduced in the Next Gen. They were way more sinister.
Yeah.
And then they turned into this sort of comic relief.
They're
It's just-
like bumbling like Wall Street guys, right?
Yeah.
Or London City guys. They're just like, but they're kind of silly. They're like, oh, let's go sell both sides guns. Where's the guns, Rom? I lost the guns. Oh, shit.
It's great.
Good stuff. All right, Nick. Well, we'll have to have you on again the next time .NET decides to blow my mind.
Yes, hopefully that'll be soon. I think they're releasing. There's a fair amount of iteration at the moment. You'll see a release at least yearly, and they're quite large releases as well.
All right, and anywhere you want to send people.
Well, I already mentioned Dome Train, but please do check it out. There's a lot of amazing people on there writing courses, not just about .NET. There's some TypeScript stuff on there as well, and even some software engineering career stuff as well. So if you're interested in how to accelerate your career, that's a good shout. I'm still going to be making videos on YouTube, so Nick Proud Programmer is my handle, and you can usually find me on LinkedIn. I'm a corporate fiend, so I'm usually spending a lot of time on there, and sometimes on Blue Sky, just Nick Proud.
All right, and I'm Mike Dominic as always. Check out the Coder Radio Discord, and see you next week.
Cheers.
Cheers. Live long and prosper. Bye.